I had told myself that afternoon would be a simple errand. At 71, I still believed in the old-fashioned power of family, that when one of us stumbled, the other stepped in. My sister Lydia had fallen on hard times after her husband lost his job at the mill, and I thought my son Dorian might help. It wasn't charity I asked for, only a short-term loan to tide her over. Dorian was busy in his office, always busy now that his contracting company had taken off. His secretary looked at me as though I didn't belong there, as if I were another appointment clogging his schedule. Sabine, my daughter-in-law, swept into the lobby with her perfect hair and clipped tone. She spotted me waiting, and her lips thinned. "Cressida," she said, not unkindly, but with that undercurrent that always made me feel like an intrusion. "Dorian's in a meeting. What brings you here?" I explained about Lydia. Sabine's eyes flicked over me, cool as glass. "You worry too much about everyone else's troubles. Dorian and I have enough on our plate without rescuing your sister." Her words stung, but I pressed on, hoping she'd understand that family was not a burden, but a duty. She sighed and finally offered to drive me home, though I could sense her irritation in the tight grip she had on the steering wheel. We rode in silence until she pulled the car to the curb near the old market. Still 3 miles from my house, rain lashed against the windshield, thick drops chasing one another down the glass. She turned to me with a smile that was more a sneer. "This is your stop," she said. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "It's pouring. Sabine, my home is still far." She shrugged. "Maybe the rain will teach you not to interfere." The words sliced through me. My hand trembled as I opened the door, the storm rushing in to soak my dress. I stepped out, clutching my handbag, and before I could protest again, she drove off. Something slipped from the seat onto the wet pavement, a leather folder darkened by the rain. I bent to pick it up, not realizing in that moment that my humiliation carried with it a secret, heavier than the storm itself. The rain pressed down on me with the weight of 100 small betrayals. My shoes sank into puddles, soaking through until every step squelched. Water ran down my back, seeped into the collar of my blouse, chilled me to the bone. I clutched the leather folder to my chest, its edges already damp, though I barely registered it. What burned sharper was the echo of Sabine's voice, dismissive and cruel, carried off in the wind with her taillights. People noticed. A man unloading crates outside the hardware store paused, frowned, then went back to his work. A woman tugging a child by the hand glanced at me, then hurried along. Their eyes said everything: pity, curiosity, relief that it wasn't them. Not one offered me an umbrella or a ride. I kept walking. What else could I do for decades? I had done the same, kept walking. When Dorian was a boy and pneumonia racked his small body, I sat through endless nights praying by his bedside. When the tuition bill for that private academy arrived, I sold my wedding ring, the last gold I had from the man who once promised to shield me from hardship. When I worked 2 sewing jobs in the factory, my hands raw and bleeding, it was always with the hope my children would live lighter lives than mine. Now my sacrifice walked in silk dresses and rode in gleaming cars, too proud to drive me the last few miles home. Every raindrop seemed to hammer in the truth I had given, and in return, I was an inconvenience to be discarded on the side of the road. By the time the pharmacy came into sight, its neon sign glowing weakly through the sheets of rain, I felt stripped of everything: dignity, warmth, even the illusion that family still meant what it used to. I pushed open the door, the bell chiming faintly, and the sudden warmth inside blurred my eyes with tears that weren't only from the storm. That was where I met the man behind the counter, and his words would settle in me deeper than the cold ever had. Warmth rushed over me the moment I stepped inside. the bell on the pharmacy door jingling faintly as I dripped onto the tile floor. I must have looked half-drowned hair plastered to my cheeks, clothes clinging to me like a second skin. Behind the counter stood an older man with silver hair combed neatly back, spectacles low on his nose. His eyes were the kind that seemed to see more than what stood before them. "Well now," he said softly, "that storm didn't spare you, did it?" I managed a weak smile. "It spared everyone but me." He disappeared into the back for a moment and returned with a steaming mug. Chamomile on the house. The warmth of the cup against my fingers nearly undid me. I sat at the small table near the window, and before I knew it, the words spilled out. I told him everything: how my daughter-in-law had left me in the rain, how my sacrifices had been forgotten, how shame clung heavier than the wet fabric on my shoulders. He listened without interruption, nodding now and then, his gaze steady and without judgment. When my voice faltered into silence, he leaned on the counter with the patience of someone who had carried storms of his own. "Sometimes the cruelest rain clears the air," he said gently. "Sometimes people need to choke on their own storm before they value the sun." The words lingered in the space between us, heavier than any consolation I might have expected. He wasn't telling me to fight, nor to surrender, only to allow the consequences to do what years of pleading never could. I sipped the tea, letting the warmth seep into me, and for the first time that day, the shaking in my chest eased. When I finally rose to leave, the storm outside had softened to a drizzle, though inside me another storm had only just begun to take shape. I walked home slowly, the leather folder pressed to my side, and later that night, curiosity led me to open it. By the time I reached home, the drizzle had dwindled to a mist, though I was still shivering from the storm. I laid my soaked coat over a chair and set the leather folder on the table. Its corners curled where the rain had seeped through, and for a moment I considered tossing it aside. But curiosity tugged at me, and slowly I opened the flap. The first pages were damp loan agreements, the ink smudged but legible enough. Numbers leapt off the paper, amounts I could never have imagined handling, all signed under Sabine's name. Behind them were overdue notices stamped in angry red, their language sharp and urgent. My stomach tightened as I sifted further through the stack until I reached the deed. It was for a property I knew Dorian owned, a small rental house he had once spoken of proudly as his first investment. But here, Sabine had mortgaged it without his signature. My breath caught. The line meant for Dorian's approval was blank. She had found a way around him. Forged or maneuvered, I couldn't be sure. But the truth was plain. The polished life she paraded was balanced on debt, secrets, and lies. I leaned back in my chair, the papers trembling in my hands. Suddenly, her cruelty in that car made a terrible sort of sense. It hadn't only been disdain for me, it had been desperation. The lashing out of someone terrified her. Careful facade might crack. Perhaps in her eyes, I wasn't just meddling. I was too close to uncovering what she fought so hard to conceal. Still, knowing the reason behind the insult didn't soothe the wound it left. My humiliation in the rain remained, heavy and raw. Yet with this folder, the balance between us shifted. She believed herself untouchable, and now I held proof that she was anything but. I gathered the papers carefully, laying them flat to dry. The storm outside had passed, but inside me a different storm gathered strength, one that no weather could wash away. Later, after a bath and a change of clothes, I sat quietly in my living room, staring at the folder as if it might speak. And in the silence, I began to decide what kind of mother and what kind of woman I would be from this night forward. The bathwater steamed as I lowered myself in, the heat wrapping around my chilled skin. For a long while, I just sat there, letting the water loosen the knots in my back and the storm's weight in my chest. The house was quiet, except for the tick of the old clock in the hallway. Silence, after years of noise and obligation, felt like its own kind of prayer. When I finally stepped out, wrapped in my robe, I wandered to the bookshelf where my photo albums rested. I pulled down the oldest one, its leather spine worn soft from years of thumbing. There was Dorian as a boy, missing front teeth but beaming at the kite we had made together. There was the picture of my eldest in her graduation gown, the smile that had carried me through sleepless nights at the sewing machine. And there, pressed between yellowing pages, was the hospital bracelet from the night I nearly lost Dorian to pneumonia. Each image was a reminder of love. Yes, but also of sacrifice. Nights when I worked until my fingers bled. Mornings when I sent them to school with food I skipped myself. Years when every penny went to their futures and none to mine. And yet, in the end, all my endurance had bought me was the sharp sting of disrespect. I closed the album gently, though my heart closed harder. For the first time, I admitted it to myself without excuse. I had allowed too much. I had forgiven too easily. I had confused sacrifice with silence. At my writing desk, I took out a pad of paper and began drafting notes for Mr. Kellerman, the lawyer who had handled my affairs for decades. My estate, my modest house, my savings. The small antiques I cherished would no longer be divided equally. Only the children who honored me would inherit. I set the pen down and felt a steadiness I hadn't known in years. Tomorrow would bring its own weight. But tonight, for the first time, I felt the balance tilt back toward me. The following day had barely settled into rhythm when a frantic pounding shook my front door. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and opened it to find Sabine standing there, hair unkempt, eyes wide and rimmed with sleeplessness. She looked nothing like the polished woman who had tossed me out into the storm. Cressida, she gasped, almost stumbling into the hallway. Please, I didn't know where else to go. I stepped aside without a word. She carried the scent of perfume hastily applied to cover fear. And beneath it, the raw tang of panic. Her hands twisted together as though wringing out the truth. We're ruined, she said finally, collapsing onto the nearest chair. The company Dorian's company, it's unraveling. Lawsuits, unpaid contractors, creditors calling day and night. They're threatening to seize the house. Her voice broke on the last word. I folded my arms and leaned against the doorframe. She searched my face, desperate for some flicker of sympathy. Please, you're the only one who can help us. We'll lose everything. I remembered her words from the day before, sharp as the rain that had stung my skin. Maybe the rain will teach you not to interfere. Now those same lips trembled as they begged for my interference. Sit, I said evenly, pointing to the kitchen table. She obeyed quickly, like a child waiting for discipline. I set a glass of water in front of her, but did not soften my expression. My silence unsettled her more than any accusation could. She spoke again, words tumbling fast. Desperate. If you could just lend us something, anything, we can stabilize things, renegotiate the loans. You have the house, the savings. Please, I swear we'll pay you back. Her eyes glistened. But I stayed still, steady as stone. For the first time, I felt no urge to fill the silence with excuses, no need to lessen her discomfort. The clock in the hallway ticked louder, each second stretching into judgment. Sabine clutched her glass but didn't drink. I held her gaze and let the quiet answer her. And in that silence, the balance of power shifted, preparing me for the words I knew I would speak next. I watched Sabine's hands tremble around the glass of water, her polished nails chipped, her voice unsteady. How quickly the proud can unravel when their foundations crack. The image of her smirk in the car yesterday flared in my mind, the rain drenching me, her words cutting like knives. I drew a slow breath and finally spoke. Yesterday, you taught me a lesson. Today, perhaps it is time you learn yours. Her head jerked up, eyes wide. Cressida, I didn't mean it that way. I was upset. The practiced composure she always wore slipped from her face, leaving behind only raw panic. You left me on the side of the road like I was nothing. I continued, my voice even almost quiet. You thought humiliation would silence me, but what it did was remind me of every sacrifice. Every night I gave what I did not have, so that your husband could stand where he does today. And still, you dared to treat me as though I were in your way. Tears streaked her makeup, her words tumbling into stammered excuses. I was scared. I thought if you involved yourself, people would start asking questions about our finances. Please, I'm sorry. I can change. I'll make it right. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The calmness frightened her more than fury ever could. I simply sat across from her, the quiet pressing in. Heavier than thunder, she searched my face for mercy, but I gave her none. My reply was steady, deliberate, the truth she had run from all along. And as I spoke, I reached for the folder I had kept beside me, ready to open it on the table between us. I laid the leather folder on the table, its edges warped from the storm, but its contents intact. Sabine's eyes fixed on it immediately, as if the weight of her secret radiated through the cover. I didn't open it. I only rested my hand on top and let the silence stretch. This morning, I began, my voice steady. I sat at my desk and made notes for my lawyer. My will is being rewritten. My house. My savings. The few antiques of value, they will no longer be divided equally. They will go only to the children who honor me. Her breath caught. You don't mean that, she whispered. I mean every word, I replied. Dorian and you have chosen pride over family. And pride has consequences. The others have shown me respect and care. They will inherit. You will not. Her face drained of color, and for a moment she looked far older than her years. Dorian doesn't know, she stammered, glancing at the folder as if it might leap open. If you tell him, if anyone finds out, I pressed my palm flat against the folder. I don't need to say a word. Secrets have a way of speaking for themselves. The debts, the property you mortgaged without his consent, it's all here. Sooner or later, the truth surfaces. She shook her head violently, tears spilling down her cheeks. Please, if he learns what I did, he'll never forgive me. I'll lose everything. Her words hung in the room, desperation soaking them like yesterday's rain had soaked me. I watched her crumble, the mask of arrogance gone, replaced by the raw fear of a woman standing at the edge of ruin. I rose from the table, the folder in my hands, and left her there in silence, knowing the storm had only just begun. It didn't take long for the whispers to ripple through town. Dorian's business, once hailed as a rising success, began to falter in full view. Contracts went unpaid, equipment sat idle, and men who had once shaken his hand with respect now spoke in hushed tones about lawsuits and debts. I said nothing, but I heard everything. At church suppers and neighborhood gatherings, I watched the sideways glances, the murmured judgments. Sabine still came, painted and polished, but the sharp edge of her confidence dulled with every passing week. She smiled too brightly, laughed too loudly, as though volume alone could drown the truth. When our eyes met across a room, she always looked away first. Dorian grew quieter, shoulders bent under a weight he wouldn't name. I saw the questions forming in his eyes, the suspicion creeping into the way he regarded his wife. He never asked me, and I never offered. silence. I learned can be more powerful than accusation. Neighbors began to avoid mentioning the company altogether, but their restraint only made the void larger. Rumor filled what politeness tried to hide. I remained still, a steady presence, letting the storm of consequence gather around them without my hand guiding it. In that stillness, something shifted. For years, I had chased after peace, excusing disrespect in the name of family. Now, for the first time, I let the pieces fall where they may. I did not rush to patch, to fix, to defend. I simply watched, and as I sat in my garden one morning, trimming back the roses, I felt the quiet certainty that this unraveling was not mine to mend. It belonged to them, and to the choices that had brought them here. 2 years have a way of softening the sharpest edges, though some wounds never truly close. The garden behind my house has grown fuller in that time, roses climbing the trellis, lavender spilling over the stone path, the pear tree heavy each summer with fruit. My grandchildren run between the rows, their laughter carrying like music across the yard. They belong to my other children, the ones who never turned me into a stranger in my own family, the ones who honored me not with gifts or grandeur, but with care. I sit on the wooden bench beneath the pear tree, pruning shears set aside, and let the sunlight rest warm on my face. Peace feels different when you have earned it, when it comes not from avoidance but from standing firm. I am no longer the woman who once stood shivering on the roadside, waiting for kindness that never came. That storm stripped me down, but in the stripping, I found my spine. Dorian comes around sometimes, alone, his words measured and softer than they used to be. He never asks about the folder, never mentions Sabine, though I know the cracks between them widened into chasms. I let him sit at my table, let him eat my bread, but I keep my silence about the past. Some truths don't need to be spoken aloud. Their weight lives in the air between us. As for Sabine, I see her only at a distance now, her face thinner, her smile tight, her presence smaller than before. She does not meet my eyes. Perhaps she never will again. I lift my teacup, the steam rising, fragrant with mint from my own patch. In the drawer inside, the leather folder remains. Its pages dry now, its power intact. I do not need to wield it. Its existence alone reminds me of what storms can teach. Love without respect is just debt, and I will never pay again. The children's laughter rings out as the sun dips low, and I breathe in the calm of a life finally claimed as my own.